This is Augie Macro with Cryptid Creatures. Today, we are going to talk about perhaps the saddest creature in all of cryptozoology. From the Lumberwoods of Pennsylvania, the squonk.
Dripping tear soaks my soul, lost in a world, won't feel it all.
Before we go into the details of the story, let's first get a broader image of the context of this legend. The squonk belongs to a category of cryptids known as fearsome critters, which are a rabble of fantastical beasts which come from the yarns and tall tales of the lumbermen of the 18 and early 1900s. Another infamous legend is that of the hodag, which we discuss in Season 1, Episode 10, The Hodag of Horror. Many of these creatures, including the squonk, come from the 1910 publication Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods with a few desert and mountain beasts, written by William T. Cox as a means to compile as many of these legends as possible. I will read you an excerpt, in fact, regarding the squonk. The range of the squonk is very limited. Few people outside of Pennsylvania have ever heard of the quaint beast, which is said to be fairly common in the hemlock forests of the state. The squonk is of a very retiring disposition, generally traveling about at twilight and dusk. Because of its misfitting skin, which is covered with warts and moles, it is always unhappy. In fact, it is said, by people who are best able to judge, to be the most morbid of beasts. Hunters who are good at tracking are able to follow a squonk by its tear-stained trail, for the animal weeps constantly. When cornered and escape seems impossible, or when surprised and frightened, it may even dissolve itself in tears. Squonk hunters are most successful on frosty moonlit nights, when tears are shed slowly and the animal dislikes moving about. It may then be heard weeping under the boughs of dark hemlock trees. In the 1939 publication, Fearsome Critters, written by Henry H. Tryon, the squonk legend is elaborated upon, giving a little bit of the natural history of the creature and some of its other features, such as webbed feet and its residence in swamps. And in the 2015 publication, Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods, 20 Chilling Tales from the Wilderness, writer Hal Johnson takes a darker turn with the legend, reinterpreting it as not only being able to melt into a puddle of its own tears, but being able to spread depression like a disease and cause its own predators to melt into puddles of their own tears. Eyewitnesses describe the squonk as being a small, pig-like creature with a robust build, ill-fitting, saggy skin covered in moles and warts, webbed feet, short limbs, and, in modern accounts, a pig-like face. Of course, its eyes are always weeping tears, and it has the ability to melt into a puddle of its own tears. In Cox's account in Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods, he dubs the squonk Lacrima corpus dissolvens, which in Latin roughly translates to tearful dissolving body, making it one of the few cryptids with a scientific name. The squonk is, of course, said to reside in the hemlock forests of Pennsylvania, which back in the 1800s, before the lumber boom, was much more expansive than it now is today, and there are very few untouched hemlock forests in the present. To investigate the squonk's native hemlock habitat more thoroughly, we visited the Hemlock Natural Area outside of the town of Blaine in the Tuscarora State Forest in Perry County, Pennsylvania. Here we are in the Hemlocks Natural Area in Tuscarora State Forest outside of the town of Blaine in Perry County, Pennsylvania. The Hemlocks Natural Area is a 1,200-acre expanse of forest, which was established in 1973 to preserve a stand of eastern hemlock trees, which once dominated the Pennsylvania landscape. Going back as far as the last ice age, hemlock and pine were the dominant trees of the forests of Pennsylvania and the northeastern United States as a whole. But with the industrialization of the lumber industry in the late 1800s, these forests were devastated, and now these hemlock only remain in fragmented stands such as this. This ecosystem once was home to many species which are now extinct in this region, such as gray wolves, American bison, American pine martens, and perhaps the squonk, which in the original tellings of the legend resided solely in hemlock forests. Is the squonk perhaps more than just a fanciful lumberwood creature, and maybe even a representative of this long-lost ecosystem, crying out for conservation? We may never know. This is not the first time that we have discussed the squonk legend. In our feature-length program, The Cryptids, Creatures, and Curiosities of the Keystone State, we visited Lackawanna State Park outside of the town of North Abington in Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania, to discuss the legend. In Season 1, Episode 11, the Festival Special, we visited the 2023 Squonkapalooza in Johnstown in Cambria County, Pennsylvania, a festival dedicated to the squonk. During the filming of this episode, we had the opportunity to visit the 2025 Squonkapalooza, again in Johnstown, and interview the founder of the festival and the creator of the company Cryptid Comforts, Lisa Russell, to learn more about the festival. Here we are at the 2025 Squonkapalooza at the Bottleworks Art Center in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where cryptid enthusiasts from across the country have gathered to celebrate the squonk legend. What got you into the whole cryptid thing?
Well, it was back in 2016. I was teaching at Portland Jewish Academy in Portland, Oregon, and I was doing their summer discovery class, and I came up with a class called Unicorns, Dragons, and Bigfoots, Oh My! And as I was doing research into that, I got really into the deep dive into cryptids. I always say that Bigfoot's kind of a gateway drug into cryptids, so that kind of led me down the path, and that was also the first year of the Oregon Bigfoot Festival, so I decided to be a vendor at that, and eventually cryptids took over everything I do.
You're pretty important for the Squonkapalooza itself.
I am one of the hosts, yes. So Joe of Cryptoteology and I were the two creators of Squonkapalooza. So this is our third year doing it, and yeah, it's going great.
What is it about the squonk specifically that you like so much?
Well, when I first heard the story of the squonk, I was very much like, I have to write a children's book about this. And as a former teacher, you know, I really wanted to write a book that was kind of at the grade level of kids, you know, learning to read. And I was like, I want them to teach the squonk some body positivity. And so I really made the book all about kindness, compassion, and friendship. And so that was kind of the catalyst for everything else that's come since. So it started off, I made the plushie first, and then I wrote the book. And then after that, I got the mascot costume. And after that, I was telling people, I was like, somebody should do a squonk-themed event. And Joe eventually said, let's do it. And I was like, oh, me? I didn't mean me, but okay. And that's how Squonkapalooza was born.
How would someone go about getting in touch with you to get some of your wares?
Cryptidcomforts.com has all my links. People can always reach out to me on Instagram. That's usually the easiest way to contact me. So I'm at cryptid_comforts on Instagram.
We also visited Mont Alto State Park outside of the town of Mont Alto in Franklin County, Pennsylvania, to investigate an account of a man named J.P. Wentling, who supposedly captured a squonk. Here we are in Mont Alto State Park outside of the town of Mont Alto in Franklin County, Pennsylvania. Mont Alto State Park happens to be the oldest state park in the entirety of the Commonwealth, having been established in 1902, but is also one of the smallest, being only 24 acres. However, it is not the details of this park that bring us here today, but rather an account of the squonk, that being the legend of Jean-Paul Wentling and his supposed hunt for the tearful beast. In our research, we've come to deduce that this is the only major or well-documented report of its kind, being featured in the original William T. Cox Fearsome Creatures of the Lumberwoods. Cox has this to say. Mr. J.P. Wentling, formerly of Pennsylvania, but now at St. Anthony Park, Minnesota, had a disappointing encounter with a squonk near Mont Alto. He made a clever capture by mimicking the squonk and inducing it to hop into a sack in which he was carrying it home, when suddenly the burden lightened and the weeping ceased. Wentling unslung the sack and looked in. There was nothing but tears and bubbles. It seems, at least for the squonk, that this defense mechanism of liquefying did in fact work, and Wentling went without his catch. Is this story true? Was there a Mr. Jean-Paul Wentling who, in the woods around Mont Alto, captured a squonk only to fail in containing it completely? We may never know. There are many explanations as to what exactly the squonk is. No one in modern time really believes that the squonk exists in any literal manner, but there are some possible inspirations for where the appearance of the creature came from, such as wild pigs or animals with mange, which causes them to have saggy, warty, diseased-looking skin. So something like a bear with mange might be a plausible explanation. Most today take it to be a more metaphorical story, representing plights of the lumbermen themselves. Some believe that it might represent depression or insecurity or isolation, which would have been emotional tolls that the lumbermen would have had. Imagine this cabin fever situation where you're hundreds of miles away from your family in the wilderness. Wouldn't you feel a little sad and lonely too? A more modern interpretation of this makes it out to be more of an environmental story, representing the devastation of the hemlocks due to the lumber era, and the many animals which went extinct because of it. Others take it to be more of a rendition of the unsuccessful hunt, as the squonk melts into a puddle of its own tears. It literally seeps out of the sack that you caught it in. It would be something like the deer or the bear or the fish that got away, that you were never able to catch. And the most obvious, the simplest explanation, which goes for the rest of these fearsome critters, is that it's simply a tall tale for entertainment. You know, you're off in the middle of nowhere with your lumberman buddies around the campfire, you have nothing better to do, might as well tell stories. And the lumberman culture is certainly full of these strange stories. All of these creatures which are in no way rational or logical or follow any natural rules, but they're silly and they give fantastical explanations for otherwise mundane events. Are any of these explanations true? We may never know. To further explore this idea of the environmentalist squonk, we sat down and talked with author, paranormal researcher, and squonk enthusiast Ronald L. Murphy Jr., who in his recent book, Squonk, An Ecological Perspective, delves into the idea further. How did you get into this cryptid thing?
Yeah, so what got me involved in the love of the things that are unexplained and things that go bump in the night was definitely through my mother. You know, I was a child of the mid to late 70s, and we would read about these subjects voraciously. And it was also a good time because there was things on television at this time as well too, like we had In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy. And
a favorite of mine.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. That's incredible. And of course, we had The Legend of Augie Creek coming out. So as a kid, you know, you would watch, you know, on Saturdays, this would be my favorite day because they would have your monster shows on, right? You would watch cartoons up to about noon, and then right about 1 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, there were these back-to-back double monster features. And inevitably, you know, a couple times a month there was something about Bigfoot. And it was a way my mom and I would just sit and bond, and we would just chill watching these shows. So that kind of carried on with me up until my adulthood. You know, I just love the idea that there's things out there that are unexplained and uncategorized by science. I love that idea.
What's your opinion as to what exactly the squonk is?
Well, I think it's a lot of different things. I think there's a lot of folklore caught up into it. I think ultimately it's probably based on some sort of biological species, whether it's its own cryptid, its own uncategorized self, or if it's based upon like a chronic wasting disease or something along those lines, or mange. But I think it has its origin in something natural, right? And the story is like, you know, a game of telephone where it's told and retold and embellished until ultimately it comes to 2025, where we have this little, you know, wart-covered, pig-looking animal that cries all the time. But I think there's definitely a genesis there in something very natural, and there's a subsequent evolution to what we have now.
In your discussions of the squonk, you give a more ecological, environmentalist perspective on the metaphor and the allegory behind the creature. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. So I think, you know, the squonk definitely represents not only other animals that have lost its habitat due to deforestation and hunting and human encroachment, but I think at the end of the day it also is a preview of what would become of us if we would completely, you know, complete our destruction of the ozone layer, right? If we would complete our deforestation of the world around us, it would be very hard to breathe. You know, our flesh would start reacting to the point that we would become grossly afflicted by all kinds of you know, warts and all these other things because the ozone layer is broken down. So I think from an environmental perspective, the squonk weeps for its loss of its environment, but it also weeps for us as well because we're going down that same road. And not only are we going down that same road, but we're going down a road that does not have squonks in it. It does not have Bigfoot or anything else because there's no place left for them to be. And we need these wild areas in order to have mysteries. And that's really one of the reasons why I feel so drawn to these kind of festivals, because without a place like this, we're not only bringing squonk to the limelight, we're also overlooking the need of stewardship and conservation to keep these animals in a world that they need to survive in.
And not only do you talk about the environmentalist perspective, but also the perspective of heritage.
Oh, absolutely. So I was lucky enough last year to speak at the Elbit Witch Festival, and that's over in eastern Pennsylvania, and it's based upon, you know, a very Pennsylvania Dutch legend that was definitely brought over by the Germans, but the idea that there's this little bipedal, you know, a little kind of like a little mini Bigfoot over there, and that represents a very unique culture, right? And here in the Johnstown area, this is kind of like a working class cryptid, right? It's based upon tales of people that were out there earning their living, cutting down trees and such. So yeah, it definitely has its niche in whatever culture it's infecting, right? So if we were in a different area, it might go by a different name or have a different type of attributes. But for what it is here in Western Pennsylvania, in the Lumberwoods in this area, it represents a dying species that's being taken out by deforestation. The Squonk book that I wrote is based upon an environmental perspective of what happens if we allow our ways to take away an environment where monsters can exist. And as I said before, we all need monsters because monsters make us far more human. I said before in one of my books that monsters, the paranormal, things that go bump in the night, are embroidered into our DNA, right? And in order for them to survive, we need to be able to survive as well, because without our reality, they don't have a reality either. You know, it's kind of this symbiosis.
How would someone be able to get one of your books?
You can go to Amazon, and get it on Amazon, or on cryptidguru.com.
Thank you.
Hey, no worries. It was my pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much, and thanks for bringing the Squonk over to see us.
Thanks for watching. And to watch our previous and future episodes, visit the Cryptid Creatures YouTube channel. Like, subscribe, and tell your friends. Cryptid Creatures is brought to you by the Kitty Petters Union, Cobble Sound Recording Company, and my dad's show, Meet the Pressers. This is Cryptid Creatures with Augie Macro, signing off.